Come on. Oh, you beggar. Good evening. Good evening. So, yes, I'm sure there's going to be many things we are going to be having to discuss tonight. But I thought I'd start off with something that has flown under the radar, at least in the UK, but has caused a little bit of a stink around Europe. I'm sure it hasn't been widely reported around Europe, but has nonetheless caused some consternation amongst European leaders because there was a bit of a meeting. There was a meeting of the European political community. Now, this was what Emmanuel Macron of France set up as a way to bring non-EU members around Europe closer to the EU to discuss areas of common interest. Okay? And so, and we've already had one of these meetings, and now we've had another one of these meetings. And Rishi Sunak caused a bit of a stink by describing it in Britain as, oh, I'm going along, I've put illegal migration at the top of the agenda while I discuss things with our European neighbours. And other European leaders there have gone, what are you on about? The BBC even reported like that. The BBC said, oh, Boris Johnson, he's gone to Europe to talk about the Stop the Boats thing, you see. He says, no, he hasn't. He's gone to Moldova to take part in this European political community meeting. And there were three things on the agenda. There was the climate emergency, specifically how to deal with it. There was peace and security, because Ukraine, in case Rishi Sunak hadn't noticed, and I gather he keeps meeting with Zelensky, so I think he has noticed, has been invaded. And energy security as well. Again, certain countries, particularly Germany, of course, which is why its economy is struggling, became far too close to Russia and became far too dependent upon Russian gas and oil. So, and it's not an easy thing to just say, oh, we'll do without Russian oil and gas then. So, there needs to be a discussion about energy security for Europe without having to rely upon people with whom you might have a political barney at some point in the future. That's what was on the agenda. Nothing to do with it's not that migration wasn't at the top of the agenda. It wasn't on the agenda at all. I mean, and you think to yourself, why would it even be on the agenda? Why would it be? Most of the countries taking part in this summit are landlocked. They don't care about boats. They don't have any boats. Moldova, where it's taking place, or it was taking place, they're landlocked, aren't they? What do they care about boats? The only boats they care about is the Russian Navy. But not to worry, because the Russian Navy keeps losing capital ships to a nation without a navy of its own. Ukraine keeps sinking their boats. So that's fine. But, this community thing exists. Ultimately, it exists, as I say, to foster closer relations between the EU and the dwindling number of non-EU European countries. Remember, Moldova has just become an EU member. If you look at that photo behind me, you've got Charles Michel there. He's the president of the European Council, for goodness sake. This is effectively, it's not an EU meeting, but it was an initiative that specifically exists to bring non-EU members around the table to discuss areas of common political interest. And there is an extent to which when people go to an international summit, each individual representative, in this case heads of government, will of course spin what's being discussed according to the most pressing issue back home. So there's a certain level at which you will spin it for your domestic audience, and politicians understand that. But he wasn't doing that. He was just lying about what it's about. And by lying about what it's about, by saying, oh, we're talking about illegal migration, he's downplaying the very serious situation that they're actually discussing. Because they don't care about refugees. Most of these countries take in more refugees than Britain does. Almost all of them deal with them more efficiently, more effectively, and more humanely as well. They don't have a problem with it. I mean, think about how many refugees Poland's taken in the last year, for example. What Can you imagine someone like Poland talking to Rishi Sunak? Rishi Sunak, oh, we've got this terrible problem with the asylum seekers and everything. And Poland goes, how many asylum seekers? Well, there's like a few tens of thousands. And Poland just goes, we've taken in over 1 million. Shut up. But anyway. Right, let's catch up some comments here. Emma's explaining about her Harry Potter analogies, I suppose, last time. Is the sound very quiet? Is it just me? You may just have to turn it up. I have the microphone. I've been using it for a couple of months now. It's a much better quality one, but the gain is up as much as it is. It's quieter than my old one, but the quality is better because it's designed for this sort of thing. The microphone I used to use it's technically a better quality microphone, but designed for studio use. When you've got hard walls, not so clever. But there we go. Right. I'm going to move. Germany did a boo-boo, shut down nuclear plants. No, well, Germany, it was foolish, and it wasn't just foolish in hindsight. You know, and I can't understand why Germany decided to, because the problem was by becoming so reliant on Russian oil and gas as well, it was not only foolish because, you know, it doesn't take a genius to know where Putin was ultimately going. For many years, for the last 20 years, to be honest, but certainly over the last 10 years. But to even put themselves in a position where, in order to maintain their own energy security, they would have to take should we say, I'm not saying like, take an optimistic view of what Russia would do. In other words, Germany basically put themselves in the position where appeasement was the best for them. Appeasement and hope that Putin didn't want to keep pushing. But he was always going to keep pushing. There was a time when the UK... Oh, no, I've missed it now. When the UK used to stand on the front line at such meetings, look at Sunak now. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? It's like... I look at the situation, I think, so what is the UK's place in the world now? It's all right saying, you know, we're a major economy. Yes, we're a major economy. We're a major military power. Yes, we're a major military power. We are being of some use to Ukraine in terms of that military aid, in both form of training, hardware, and let's be honest, you know, Britain is one of the countries that actually has, you know, elite special forces active in the area, even though, don't tell anyone. Everyone knows. So, you know, in militarily we're being useful. I don't think we're being as useful in terms of sanctions against Putin's regime. We're not, like, for example, is Lebedev Senior, is it Alexander Lebedev, Evgeny's father? So he was the guy who was an actual Russian spy, KGB officer, who spied on Britain. So he was an active spy in Britain during the Cold War. And Ukraine have applied sanctions to him. And we're not doing. Why are we not doing? Because he's one of Boris Johnson's drinking buddies. It's really that simple. But you look at the UK's place in the world. What is our place in the world? And it's really hard now. We used to be a bridge, both in terms of trade and culturally, between like other sort of what you might call Western nations and continental Europe. We're not anymore. We've burnt that bridge down. So we're of no use to anyone for that now. We have no influence in the EU. We have no trade links with the EU. We're just an island off the coast of Europe. We've got a lot of sheep, but we can't sell them to anyone. And then you think to yourself, well, you know, people will just take the view, well, you know, Britain's still very good when it comes to international affairs. You know, we know our stuff. We have fingers in pies, and we're very good at sort of judging the political situation around the place. Not anymore. I mean, you know, it's not just... People may have imagined when Boris Johnson left the scene, oh, thank goodness, Britain can start to be a bit more grown up now. Oh, dear, they've made Liz Truss Prime Minister. Oh, no. Thankfully, that didn't last very long. Oh, good, Rishi Sunak. Right, okay. And he did. Initially, he started to engage. He engaged more. with various countries, including Europe. Well, Europe's not a country. In terms of the European countries, our neighbours, he started to engage a lot better. But it's obviously limited. He did that so that he could get his Windsor framework deal over the line to give himself, because he needed a win. He needed to achieve something that Boris Johnson couldn't. So that was his win. But then he's behaving like this again. And it's utterly ridiculous. Anyway, did I hear David Lammy on LBC, I think it was last week, saying we can't bring back freedom of movement until we sort out our own affairs? Can't remember exactly what, but definitely on the cards. I didn't hear him, no. But, I mean, David Lammy, of course, much like Keir Starmer, despite what anyone says, they weren't just Remainers. They weren't like some of these Tory pragmatic Remainers, like, well, we don't really like the EU. We just, but we were better off inside it than outside it. You know, the likes of Lammy and Starmer are fully on board with the aims of the EU. I mean, you can find in the EU's library books and academic papers written by Keir Starmer. You know, and David Lammy, I know particularly because he's been more explicit than Starmer. Starmer's at least keeping his counsel to himself. David Lammy absolutely hates that you can't have it. I've just seen, I haven't read it yet. I've just seen on The Guardian, I was having a quick flick to see, just to make sure there hasn't been any breaking news before I came online. And it's entitled, Labour Needs an Honest Debate About Brexit Damage, Union Warns. The union is GMB Union. And it's like, the country needs an honest debate about Brexit damage. And that should be driven by the media, and it's not being. But a political party needs an honest debate about anything, about... Basically, if the public are not ready for an honest debate about something, then a political party needs that honest debate like a hole in the head. What a political party needs is to win elections. And these people at the top of the Labour Party now absolutely hate the fact that they cannot be honest about it. But being honest about it is to tell a lot of people that ultimately they're stupid because they were duped, they were lied to. Because it's like, you know, if you think about, like, most people accept that Brexit's going very badly now. So you have to draw one of two conclusions. Either it was all lies and it was never going to work out, which is the truth. But that suggests that all the people that supported it were a little bit stupid, which is not necessarily true. You know, you can't expect people to understand the issues. They should have been properly informed by the media and politicians, and they were lied to. But nonetheless, it's hard for those people not to feel you're saying they're stupid. Your second option is to say that it was badly handled. Well, that's the one that pricks your ego less. That pricks your ego less. So that's the one Labour are taking. But it won't be there forever. And it won't be, you know, I am going to suggest, we know what the state of play is for the first term. We know what Labour's aims are for their first term in Parliament when it comes to Brexit issues. I've already talked about some of their, what appears to be non-Brexit policies that are actually really Brexit policies, such as, for example, adding millions of pro-EU voters to the electorate. How's that not going to change things? But I would also say, I would expect movement for the second term. In fact, it's not impossible to see movement in the first term, but it depends on progress made. Remember, we have got to build bridges with the EU. You know, I get no end of comments of people saying, look, people in Europe can't be dealing with Britain right now. They've got, I mean, look at, you know, this meeting in Moldova. What were they trying to talk about? The climate emergency. That's incredibly serious. Peace and security. The biggest country in Europe by like land area is being invaded. Russia is invading Europe, for goodness sake. Energy security, because the country that a lot of Europe depended upon for energy security has invaded it. These are really incredibly serious issues. And yet Britain has turned up like a drunk to a dinner party. And, you know, so we've got to repair that damage before anything can really happen. But anyway. Brown's rally for the Alliance for Radical Democratic Change and Andy Burnham speaking about the need for PR and devolution for regions of the country. What's the chance of this becoming policy? Devolution for region of the country certain, because that is Labour policy. In fact, that is Keir Starmer's big reform. You know, Labour are very bad at getting this messaging out there. But Keir Starmer's big thing is actual reform. And I mean reform. If you look at like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown's Labour, they fixed a lot of problems. They improved a lot of things. But I'm not sure there was very much that I would really call reform. I'm trying to think if there was really anything that was reform. There was a lot of changes, like, for example, making the Bank of England sort of, in theory, independent. You know, there were a lot of changes, but I can't think of anything that was a genuine reform. And a reform, remember, is when you take something and you basically completely change the way it works, like you're breaking it down and building it back up again. So the devolution to the regions is that, and that it would be a reform, abolishing the House of Lords. Like, you know, under Blair, they removed, like, they basically put in some sort of elected lords, but that's not really a reform, is it? Because the House of Lords was still basically hereditary and political appointments. So I would say I think Starmer's plans for basically having decisions not made in Westminster about regional issues, letting different regions have decision making for investments there, and having Westminster mostly deal with purely national issues would be a reform. It's a very difficult one. In terms of PR, we obviously don't know. We know that they're not going to bring it in the first term. We know that. I would be more comfortable if they did, as a Labour supporter and as an anti-Tory. But I also understand strategically why it would be better to bring it in the second term. Now, I don't know that they're even going to bring it in the second term, but they should. They should not leave it for a third term, and they should certainly not leave it indefinitely. It's like really weird. If you ask me as a Labour supporter, I just want PR brought in as soon as possible. But at the same time, you can also argue, is it going to be too much? We're going to have the abolition of the House of Lords. You're going to have much greater devolution. If you're going to change the electoral system as well, is that like changing too much too soon? But also the fact, if Labour bring it in the second term, they can have 2 full terms where they have majority power. And then at the time at which maybe the Tories will be sorting themselves out and making a challenge of that third election, all of a sudden you bring PR in to stop that. So basically what I'm saying is, if Labour were to say, include me in their strategy team or policy team, if I was acting purely in Labour's best interest, I would argue to bring it in the second term. But as someone who's not in that position, I'd feel more comfortable if they brought it in the first, but they won't do. Because strategically, it's not the best thing to do. S-Fax there saying, my compatriots don't really love Bojo, maybe a bit, but primarily the UK for all the support, while majority being ignorant about Russian money, etc. See, that's the issue. You know, Boris Johnson will... You can understand it because he is the Prime Minister that's not just, you know, provided military support, nowhere near as much as America, of course, but made such a song and dance about it, made a massive song and dance about it. And yet, he doesn't care. He doesn't care about Ukraine. He doesn't care about his own country. He certainly doesn't care about Ukraine. He cares about popularity. There was no way, you know, we know like there's people on the left and the right, the extreme left and the extreme right, who try to argue against opposing Russia, right? We know that. Boris Johnson was never going to take that line because the country as a whole was never going to take that line. And Boris Johnson, ultimately, as a populist leader, you have to be popular. and trying to even defend Russia at that time. Remember, he did defend Russia when he basically murdered people in the UK, but he was never going to be able to defend Russia after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, particularly with the very, very obvious genocide, really. So that's why Boris Johnson did that. He doesn't care about anyone. He's not doing it because he's outraged at what Russia did. He's doing it because it was popular. You say it's the media's responsibility of having the Brexit debate. What is the job of His Majesty's opposition in government, in fact, to become the government? I've said it so many times. That is their one job. It is the job of the leader of the opposition to become the prime minister. One job. Now, when he is the prime minister, he has lots of jobs. But until he's prime minister, and I said the same of Corbyn, I would have said the same of Miliband, if I was talking on the internet at the time about politics. But I did say the same thing to anyone I did talk to politics about. One job to become prime minister. Once you've done it, then you have lots of jobs, which includes remaining prime minister after the next election. But that is the job. It's not the job of the leader of the opposition to lead a public debate. It is not the job of the leader of the opposition to try and change policy. They can try, but it's not their job. It is the job of the government to decide what the country's policies are. So if you want to, as leader of the opposition, decide the country's policies, the way you do that is by becoming the prime minister and leading the government. That is the single goal. That is it. Cabinet Office have warned Johnson they'll pull public funding for his lawyers if he releases info without their permission. Well, this is the thing is, the information is the government's property. It is absolutely the government's property. Let me see. Let me try and find something. Hold on. Someone tweeted this earlier. I'll put a link. I'll put a link in the description below for people not watching live, but I'll put it in the chat now. If anyone wanted to have a look at it. So this is a document and it includes WhatsApp. This is from the government. This is about government information, right? I'll read it very briefly because there'll be a bit of a delay between me posting it and reading it out. It says using non-corporate communication channels. So this is the policy on using non-corporate communication channels. And it says in brackets, example, WhatsApp, private email, SMS, right? For government business. And the relevant points that the person's highlighted here is that information is the property of the government. If you use your own private email, the information you're emailing is, and any replies you get is still the property of the government. That information is the government's information. Doesn't matter if you use your own personal means of communication, which you shouldn't do, by the way. But even if you do, it's still the government's. So it is quite right and I said this in my video before, a few days ago, before it all blew up, that Boris Johnson would not, even though the information should be handed to the inquiry, Boris Johnson should not unilaterally do so. It belongs to the government, and the government have to be because there may be some things in there that genuinely need to be redacted for the purposes of national security. Not for the protection of ministers. They shouldn't be redacting anything to protect ministers. They can redact things that are genuine national security issues, which should not be that much. They can also redact things that to protect officials. I don't want officials getting doorstepped by journalists because it's not their fault. They are there to facilitate government policy or to advise the government. They do not make policy decisions. It's ministers that are accountable to the public, not officials. But there we go. You say, no, it's not one job. It's to oppose and block inhumane policies to become PM. No, they can't do any of that as leader of the opposition. If you want to block inhumane policies, you become the government. It's really that simple. It's that simple. Who's pleased that Ed Miliband lost the election and the Tories came in and delivered Brexit? I'm not. Who's pleased that Jeremy Corbyn did the same thing? I'm not. Because they didn't block anything. Nor can Starmer. They can't block anything. They can form a government, is what they can do. And that's what they should do. I believe there was polls suggesting 63% for rejoining. No, there wasn't. Those, whenever you see those polls, look very carefully if it includes don't knows. That one, because I know which one you mean. It was a recent one. Did not include don't knows. Don't knows doesn't mean won't vote. Now, and also some of the ones who say I would rejoin. Like the thing is, you cannot ignore don't knows. I will say there are way more want to rejoin the EU than want to stay out, but there are also a hell of a lot of don't knows. And think about this. Let's say there were to be a referendum. The don't knows are don't knows, right? Which campaign is most likely to be effective? The Leave campaign with all its money behind it, or the Remain campaign? Or I say it can't be a Remain campaign anymore. Rejoin campaign, sorry, right? Because who's going to fund the Rejoin campaign? Who are going to have leading it? Who are going to have leading it? This was the problem we had in 2016. The Leave campaigns, of which there were two main ones, the official one and an unofficial one that had a lot of money behind it. They had all the best strategists behind them, the best that money could buy. Foreign, Putin, obviously, the Russian bots flew in the day or two before it. They were using the Cambridge Analytica type targeting of soft voters, effectively. All of that was because they had the money behind it and the organisation behind it. What did we have? David Cameron and Jeremy Corbyn. That's what we had. There was no other campaign. Well, there will have been other campaigns, but you can't tell me the names of any of them. We had the one official campaign that was led by David Cameron and Jeremy Corbyn. One prime minister who was and this, remember, a lot of the people who voted Leave because austerity had crushed their standard of living, and they were told that they could recapture it leaving the EU. Were these the people likely to believe David Cameron, anything he said, when he was the one who inflicted austerity on them? As for Jeremy Corbyn, he buggered off on holiday halfway through it because he was really a Lexiteer. So, you, what's it now? Where was I? Sorry, I got distracted by a comment. And now I've lost it. I've lost it. But yeah, would the same thing actually be any different? The thing more in our favour now is that a lot of the Brexit lies will be less effective, but the Brexiteers wouldn't use the same arguments. They've already used it. The arguments they will use, I will tell you now, will be, we'll have to adopt the euro, we'll have to go into Schengen, which is not actually true, by the way, but that's what they'll say. They'll point out all the things that EU member states are supposed to do. They won't talk about the fact there's a negotiation process. And also, people will think, well, we're bad at negotiating anyway, so, what the hell. They'll also talk about all the years of damage it will do to relationships. And remember, what was the thing that got Brexit over the line? 2019, get Brexit done? Because people were sick of the government focusing on Brexit instead of the issues they cared about. Now, they're still doing that. But nonetheless, Brexiteers will argue this will cause, they'll point to some recent examples of of states joining the EU. They'll talk about how long it takes, and they'll say it's going to take this long. And throughout all that time, the government will be wrangling about Brexit instead of paying attention to our broken economy, healthcare, and all the rest of it. Right? Who are we going to get to counter it? There's no money on the Remain side. The billionaires aren't on the Remain side, or Rejoin. I keep saying Remain. I mean Rejoin. But anyway, right, waffling on. Got some more comments. Uncle Social there saying, I have an encrypted phone for work and my employers can access anything on it anytime they wish. Johnson's terrified that information will be released about his transgressions with his now wife. There'll be lots of things that Boris Johnson does not want coming out. But the thing is, this nonsense about, phone, it's security risk, is absolute rubbish. Even I know, and I'm not a security, plenty of security experts have said you can easily get the information off it. Even I know all you do is take it into a Faraday cage, turn it on, download the messages onto something else, turn it off again. What? For goodness sake. M saying, I voted for Brexit purely because I hated David Cameron's guts. I've since realised every Tory is bad. Well, a number did. I mean, we know from polling, and when you think it was 52 to 48, it didn't have to be a lot doing these things. We knew some people did it because of the promise of the money for the NHS, which was always a lie. We knew some people did. And do you know what? I think that's the cruelest lie. Because, I've come across testimony from people saying that they voted for the more money for the NHS because they've got young children who have serious medical conditions. And the NHS already at that time was failing because the government were underfunding it. The idea that it would get this huge cash injection appealed to them. And I think that's cruel because I think about what those parents must be like now. Their child, is medically vulnerable, and yet the NHS is way worse now. I just think that's one of the things that makes me angriest about Brexit. Because I keep thinking about people like that. And, they were already struggling to get the medical attention they needed for their child, and it'd be way worse now. And how must it feel for that parent to know that they voted to make it harder for their child to get the medical care they needed? Because that's what's happened in reality. It's not why they did it. But what's happened is those parents voted to increase the chances of their child suffering complications or even dying because our healthcare is now way worse. But there were people who did it just because they hated Boris Johnson, David Cameron. There were all sorts of reasons for voting for it. Almost nobody voted for it based on something that's true. Almost nobody. But I don't feel sorry for all of the people who voted for a lie. The people who voted to reduce immigration, they can go to hell. I'm sorry they feel that way. I'd like to explain things to them, but at the end of the day, that was a malicious reason. But there were people who voted for reasons, and it's cruel, really. But anyway. Nico saying, this is presumably a comment to something going in the chat. No appetite in EU member states to bail out another country. Britain should fix its own crap first. Oh yeah, we're absolutely going to have to put our house in order. Like at the moment, I mean, you think about all the barriers to joining the EU. Our political system is not fit for purpose, really, is it? We don't have proportional rep. We have first past the post for our National Assembly. We have an unelected second chamber. Obviously, that is intended to be changed in the first term. But there we are. So you're saying, I voted to remain predominantly because I didn't trust our government to rule the country. Wish I hadn't been proved right. Well, that was another aspect to it as well. The thing with the EU is it's not a case of like trusting foreigners more than your own government. It's just that the EU can never be like ruled by a single narrow interest group because there's all lots of different countries. And, some at any particular time, some countries have quite a right-wing government. Some countries have a left-wing government. Some a centrist government. Some might be further to the right, further to the left. But it's a whole spread in there. And you've got a whole spread of different parties in the European Parliament. And some of these parties with common interest band together to form larger voting blocs. But you can't have any narrow political interest group controlling the EU Commission, the EU Council, or the EU Parliament. And the more member states you have, the less chance you have of being able to have a narrow interest group rule the roost. So, so this is why you would always trust the EU over your own government, no matter which country you're in, doesn't it? You don't even have to have an arsehole of a government. And it's because they will never, submit to narrow interests. Even given that when we were in the EU, like the UK, France and Germany, if they ever sort of agreed on something, it was going to happen. But even then, those three countries weren't going to have identical types of government at any one time. Phil saying, I knew the Tories were evil when Malcolm Rifkin sent me a birthday card wishing me a happy birthday and congratulating me on the fact that I could now pay the poll tax. So I was a bit young for that. Not to mention Jacob Rees-Mogg promising cheaper clothing for their children. Oh yeah, they were utterly cynical about their promises. They really were targeting people's empathy for their nearest and dearest. It was so cynical, so cruel. But anyway. Would a UK person asking asylum in an EU country be accepted? I suspect not, in all honesty. I mean, I don't think we're actually persecuted people. Maybe Philip Schofield, but that's more the media. I don't think, in all honesty, the government... I mean, it's allowing lots of people to die, but I don't think you get to claim it's persecution. They're just letting people starve, aren't they? And denying them medical care. So I don't think so. Although, bear in mind, a UK citizen is free to go and live in Ireland. I mean, so I'd sort of considered that at one time. I mean, I wouldn't now. Well, actually, I've got more optimism for the future now. But, when I was single, I first of all thought, because I did not like the way the country was going after even before that, it's really, I would say, early on in 2019, as I was starting this channel, I had a great many fears for the country, the direction of travel. And because I had no confidence that Labour were putting itself in a position to win an election. And I did not like the way the Conservative Party was moving. And I did think to myself, should I really hang about? I was thinking, because especially when, at the time I decided to become a full-time YouTuber as well, I could basically live anywhere, really, that had a good internet connection. I could live anywhere. And I thought to myself, it was Scotland. Scotland might be all right. They're shielded somewhat because Scotland is the most sensibly devolved part of the UK. And I thought that will shield me from quite a lot of what's going on. But then I thought, am I maybe even better off leaving the country completely, going to the Republic of Ireland? The problem there is I wouldn't really support any political party. I'd be very, and I don't like the term politically homeless. I know some people use it. I know what they mean. I wouldn't use that. I would always vote for someone. But I might be one of those who flips between different parties according to, from election to election. Which would be an odd thing. It's something I've never done. I've never, and there are people that do that. There are people that will vote for one party in one election, another party in the next. And it's, I've never really gotten used to that concept because it's never applied to me. But it might in Ireland. Say, would it be a good idea for Labour to start being honest about Brexit shortly after winning the general election to accelerate the shift in opinion? See, my argument there is, first of all, I will keep saying it is for the media and campaigners to try and change public opinion. I'm not saying it's not for the government, but it is for a political party to win power. And they're not doing their own ideals any favours if they create a stink. But what I would say is this. How effective are Labour at changing public opinion? It's easier in government. I'll grant you it's easier in government. But my argument is always this. First of all, Labour are really bad at making arguments. Like I talked earlier on about Starmer's reforms for devolution, not just greater devolution for the already devolved parliaments and assembly, but regionally. A lot of people don't know about it because Labour are really bad at communicating, yeah? So they're bad at communicating, they're bad at persuading people. And then they're up against a load of different media that people don't realise is all controlled by three blokes who have the same mindset as each other. And so what Labour would be doing is trying to say to the public, the Conservatives and all of these media outlets are all lying to you. We're the honest ones. Now, if someone came to you and you didn't know much about a matter, and you had like 20 sources of information, and 19 of them all agreed with each other, and one of them said to you, no, they're all lying to you. We're the honest ones. Are you going to believe it? I wouldn't believe it. You know, and that's the problem that Labour have. It's not, you know, it's not that they will consciously want the public to be deceived, because apart from anything else, it's not doing Labour any favours. Brexit is a millstone around any government's neck, including Labour's. It's the fact that how do you do it? They're not very good at it. Just they're not good at it, and they don't have the media behind them. It's really very tricky. What do I make of Labour's proposal to tackle student debt? Well, I've already said so for those who don't know, Labour are not at the moment promising to abolish student fees, but they are promising to reduce the repayments. Now, in reality, most student debt isn't paid anyway, bear in mind. It's like a graduate tax. You pay a certain amount according to what you earn. And if you earn below a certain amount, you don't pay anything. After so many years, it's all cancelled anyway. So it's not like you're lumbered with the debt forever. So reducing the payments you would pay is basically like reducing that graduate tax rate, isn't it? That will be helpful. But my personal view on student debt, I've already said this, is if I were in charge of the policy, I would take the view, it's in now, I would leave it in, but I would abolish it for courses that we need graduates for. So, for example, we need more engineers. So anyone studying engineering at university would not pay fees. In addition, if you were going there as the first graduate in your family or something like that, or if your parents weren't graduates, I'd also make sure there were bursaries as well in place. But there would not be any student tuition fees. And there'd be bursaries for people who don't come from a graduate family. Because that way you can sort of move people towards the sort of skills that we need. You know, so studying nursing, studying medicine, studying veterinary medicine, veterinary science, I think they do first of all. I should know because my partner's eldest is doing vet med at university. Engineering, you know, all the sort of graduate degrees that we are short of in this country, I would abolish the fees for that. That way you're offering a financial... Because remember, who do tuition fees really sort of dissuade? Poor people who have an aversion to debt. Because as I say, student debt isn't really debt in the normal sense, because you are liable for a debt for the rest of your life. You're not with student fee, and you pay according to your means. You don't pay according to like a pre-arranged term of repayment. But it does put a lot of people from poorer backgrounds off. So that way you'd encourage more people from those backgrounds to study useful courses. So you've got social mobility built into encouraging more people to do the courses we need. That's my view. But anyway, I'm Yorkshire. I couldn't move beyond Sheffield. Oh, of course I could. I haven't lived in Yorkshire ever since I moved away from home. I've lived underneath Yorkshire. I first of all lived in Grimsby for quite a long time. Then I moved to Immingham. Then I moved to Scotland, Scunthorpe, and you know now I keep moving closer towards Doncaster where I grew up. I went to the East Coast and have slowly moved across, but I'm still sat underneath Yorkshire, underneath the Humber as well. Would I keep tuition fees in place for students studying more creative subjects, i.e. creative writing, music, performing arts? Well, I wouldn't, I don't know, is the simple answer. It would depend how useful those graduates are to us. I would base it pure, you know, like with our immigration, now that we, you know, we have an immigration system because we left the EU. So we have a shortage occupation list. And if you're on the shortage occupation list, it's easier to get a visa. I'd have the same thing when it comes to tuition fees. So you don't pay tuition fees on the courses we need more of. So if there were certain humanities subjects of which we had a shortage, then yes, that would apply to that. But it wouldn't apply to anything for which isn't. But it also has to be said, most of the graduate courses for which we have a shortage of skills in this country tends to be for the science-based ones, because for whatever reason, we have more humanities, just in general, humanities graduates anyway. Because remember, all public spending is supposed to be in the economic interests of the state. You need to tie it in with the economic interests of the state. We have healthcare, not to be nice to people, but to make sure that you can be back to full productivity. We have universal education, not because it's nice if you can read, but because we need people to be skilled and educated in the workplace. Why am I ignoring the questions about Jamie Driscoll? Is that to me? I haven't seen any, sorry. I do get a lot of questions. I don't see them all. Because as soon as I answer one, I try to stop looking at them for a little bit, because then I get distracted, which sometimes happens anyway. Although you would also have to explain to me who James Driscoll is, because I don't know. When you say, my mother was seconded to train as both midwife and a health visitor, was expected to repay that secondment with a guaranteed job for the equivalent time of the course. Well, now the other thing I did, because I did do a video on this. So although I say, abolish tuition fees for these courses, there is another aspect as well. So let's say you're training a nurse. It's of no interest to the UK Treasury to pay to train a nurse who then buggers off to Australia for better pay. Not that the pay should be better in Australia. So there's several parts to it. I just didn't want to go all through all it here. But I would also say, the way I would arrange it is, technically the tuition fee is added to your student debt. You just don't pay any of it back. And for every year that you don't even have to be doing that job technically, although the understanding will be you will. For every year that you are resident in the UK, 10% of it gets knocked off. No interest accrues for 10 years. So the idea is, you don't pay any of that back. None of that's included in your repayment. If you stay in the UK for 10 years, then it's all wiped out. And the reason why I would say 10 years is because after 10 years, you're hopefully settled and you're probably not as much of a flight risk anyway. Plus, we've already got a fair amount of value out of you. I'm saying, before I studied creative writing, I studied music performance in FE College. It's a level 3 A-level equivalent. See, I've just taught science. You see, Starmer's changed his position on tuition fees. Yes. It was announced he'd changed it a few weeks ago. We just didn't know what he'd changed it to. But we do now know. Okay, different question then. What do I say to us paleontologists getting a fair share of the funding rather than relying on shady private dollars? I don't really know very much about paleontology. All I would say is, if tuition fees are in, you could still reduce them. But I would say, if tuition fees are in anyway, why not use it? Because if we've got a glut of people studying a subject because it's popular, why not get people to think about, why not encourage people to study courses that develop skills we need? I don't know whether we've got a shortage of paleontologists or not. You'd have to tell me that, because I don't know anything about paleontology. Paleontology is very similar to geology. It's the study of rocks, essentially. And I was never really... There were two subjects I was never really keen on in terms of my scientific education. That was rocks and electronics, for different reasons. Artists would say we need artists. I'm not denying we need artists. I'm not saying we don't need artists. What I'm saying is that there are some courses, and some of those are arts courses, for which we have more graduates than we have room for in the economy. And wouldn't it be better for some of those humanities graduates who are working in McDonald's to have studied engineering and be like building bridges, is what I'm saying. You know, and it's not a science, it's not a STEM versus humanities argument. We need both. It's just that people tend to study humanities beyond the level at which we need them because they tend to be more appealing. Particularly when you have a situation where we have a society that, ever since Tony Blair came to power, we have a society that basically encourages people to study at university, even if they had no real ambition to do so. So it's then, well, what do you study? So if you've got someone who doesn't have a really burning vocation, what are they? But their parents or their school just says, well, you're bright and you should go to university and you should study at university because you're clever. What are you going to study? You're going to study what is popular. You're going to study, you know, what you think you're going to enjoy. You're going to do it for enjoyment. Now, you should enjoy what you study, of course, but that is going to, if you don't have a particular ambition to be a graduate, you're just going to, and it's not basing it on what we need. Now, I can't give you the definitive list of what we need. I just know some of them. As I say, I wouldn't be sat there as the education minister or the chancellor or the prime minister going, oh, well, we need these. No, I would order an inquiry. I would say, which graduate skills are we short of? Right, those who study that will have their tuition fees paid for them. And you could refresh it every few years. Every few years you could rejig it according to what was needed. Scrap tuition fees for journalism degrees, they need diversifying. We are very badly short of journalists, but as I understand it, and again, I don't know enough about journalism, as I understand it, the big problem with journalism is not so much, I can well believe there aren't as many people studying it now. The problem is career progression. Because the way it used to work in journalism is you would get a job, first of all, for your local paper, not really paying much. In fact, to begin with, not paying anything. You'd basically be doing it for free while you did a proper job. Lots of journalists had like what we might, I'm not saying journalists, not a proper job, a different job, shall we say. So you'd be doing that, you'd be writing for your local paper. Get yourself noticed. Then maybe you get taken on, or you work for the local radio station, something like that. You then get into paid employment. It's not very much money. You're still cutting your teeth, right? So you start to build your way up. Whereas now, as I understand it in journalism, the problem is all that local journalism is out because people don't buy newspapers so much, which means they don't buy local newspapers so much. So, you know, it's been completely cut off. So journalism is cut off at the knees now. The only way to make it in journalism is to basically get taken on straight away for one of the big nationals. Usually there are local journalists as well, but nowhere near as many of them. It's like the pyramid sort of upside down a little bit. Yes, there is a shortage of paleontology again. No, not just about rocks. We need to understand life's evolutionary history. I'm not knocking paleontology. You know, if there is a shortage, then it's simple. If there's a shortage of paleontologists, it would be added to the list. That's really all there is to it. Whatever we are short of would be added to the list. Because if the Treasury is going to argue that we cannot afford to abolish tuition fees, it's like, okay, we can abolish some of them though, can't we? We can afford to abolish some of them. So then you say, okay, we can afford to abolish some of them. And you abolish the ones that encourage people to do the graduates for which we have shortages of. Excuse me. I thought there were 200 applications for every real job in the media. There probably are. But that's the problem, isn't it? There aren't enough jobs. But you know, in the media can also mean anything. And it also doesn't mean they're any good at it. Because again, where do you learn your trade? where if you look at newspapers these days, in the Daily Telegraph, things like that, how many of them are written by real journalists who've actually learnt their trade properly? Very few now. There are still some, very few. They're mostly people who made a name for themselves and then go. I mean, look at GB News. I know it's not a serious organisation, but still, look at GB News. Who do they have on? They're not journalists. They're people who built a name for themselves on social media and then get a job on GB News. You've got Darren Grimes. He's not a journalist. You've got Darren Grimes going around with the microphone going to Steve Bray. Oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? But it's also at the bottom end. There's no money in the lower levels of journalism these days. Pastor Rogue saying local papers are more or less gone in most areas. BBC local radio greatly reduced. Yeah, because people just don't buy local papers. The best way for a local paper to manage these days is advertising. You just almost have to give it away and just make your money from the advertising inside it. How do we deal with all the labour jobs that educated people don't want to do? What's the career progression for a farm worker? Not everyone studies at university, though. And it could be argued you don't want to adopt a policy that deliberately keeps people in manual work, because apart from anything else, increasingly, manual work is the first thing to be abolished when new technology comes online. In fact, I mean, we've had this for nearly 3 centuries. New technology effectively makes manual labour easier, which means you need fewer people to do it. But even now, even some sort of clerical roles will be going. In fact, that's another blow to journalism, isn't it? If AI gets out of control, the editor of the Daily Telegraph will just go to this AI bot, type me a story saying Brexit's brilliant. Thank you very much. So instead of giving it to a journalist or a correspondent and saying, can you have it on my desk for tomorrow at 9, please? You say to the AI bot, write me an article about how brilliant Brexit is. Can I have it in 3 nanoseconds, please? Yes, you can. Here it is. But anyway, the government and corporations haven't been funding research or infrastructure, so why would people study those things to work at McDonald's when they could study humanities and work at McDonald's? It's a good question, but again, we need that as well. It's like not one thing. You need a holistic policy. But we are short of engineers. There is more than enough work for engineers in this country, and doctors and nurses, and apparently paleontologists, as well as I'm sure any number of other things. All the people on GB News are all future Robert Maxwells. No, they're not going to be that rich, are they? Can you imagine Darren Grimes actually? I don't know how much he must get paid. Doesn't he keep getting sacked from GB News as well? Doesn't he keep sexually assaulting people there and getting the sack? Well, he's got the sack at least once for that. And then he came back again. Science and maths is too hard for some. Yeah, we don't need loads of people to do. We just need the able ones. There are people who aren't from a graduate background who are very bright, and they're put off because of the fear of student debt, or because they're not from that sort of background, they fear like getting a job in that industry or something. They shouldn't do. Private education gets you any job you want apart from specialist jobs. So I've heard. So I see, in government especially. But anyway. Wendy's saying, the job I do, my employer keeps saying they're trying to make a hard job easier. Hasn't happened yet, but only a matter of time. They're inevitably, right, as technology marches on, certain jobs just become easier. And, when you're talking about a situation where a business needs to make money, that basically means needing fewer employees, sorry. I mean, it's the classic, for those who remember One Foot in the Grave, I was going well back now. I was a teenager myself when it came out. But the very first episode of that was Victor Meldrew being replaced by an electronic box and being forced into retirement earlier than he wanted to. But, technology inevitably, and as I say, the manual work is the first to go. You can argue there'll always be a sort of a need for a lot of manual work, but I would say there's not, not necessarily. But even some clerical work now. Oh, go on. I do know who you mean now, One Angry Pagan. What's this I'm hearing about Jamie Driscoll being blocked from running for mayor of Northam Tyne? So I know that one, yes. He's been good for the party on TV. No, he hasn't. He hasn't. At the end of the day, and I've said this before, and this will always be my position, right? First of all, it should have sent alarm bells when the decision was announced. He had a lot of support from Conservative MPs. In a way, for non-partisan people, oh, isn't it nice if people of different political parties get on? Yeah, it is nice. It's not quite so nice when you get on better with Tories than you do your own party, though. The bottom line is Starmer has made a big thing, and I actually support this, of you need people who are going to be Labour MPs. They don't push their own, private little policies. If you want to argue this person was effective in the role, they can stand as an independent. They might even win it. Mayoral elections can be won by independents. If that independent is popular and is seen as good in the role, he could win. But you're talking about people who do not back the Labour Party. They join the Labour Party because they're in a Labour area and that's the way to get elected. They want to be a politician. How do you become a politician? You need to be in the party that's going to get elected in that area. So you join the Labour Party in those sort of areas. All day and all night, I will say this. Nobody deserves to be a politician, for a party. If you think you deserve to have that position, you stand as an independent. Labour candidates are servants of the Labour Party. They are there to prioritise the interests of the Labour Party, ultimately. And whether they deserve people's votes depends on whether they deliver for the people. And what you need is a group of people who prioritise that above everything else. And I don't care for anyone, even Starmer himself. When Starmer needs to go, I will want him to go. I support him at the moment because he's delivering a Labour government. That's it. That's all there is to it. So that's my attitude to that. No one deserves to be a Labour candidate. No one. Someone could have done a really good job for 20 years. I don't care. I'm not interested. They can bog off because they're there to serve a purpose. And if they won't do it, they can. No one's stopping them from standing. They can stand as an independent. But there we go. What would be the best way? This has to be the last one, I think. What would be the best way to deal with people who lose their manual jobs after being replaced by machinery? To me, it seems they simply get ignored. Yes, I think two things. So my own personal view on this is two things. First of all, like I've said, technology inevitably means you need fewer people to do jobs. So unless you create new jobs out of something, and mostly the new jobs are looking after the machines, but that will never be more jobs than you're losing to them, because otherwise that doesn't make sense having the machine in the first place, does it? So we're moving towards a society where ultimately we know we can't. And okay, it's not like Tomorrow's World in the 60s, where by now everything was supposed to be done for us. I mean, the Jetsons were supposed to be here. We were supposed to have a robot. Okay, there are robot vacuum cleaners, but they're actually rubbish. We were supposed to have someone who looks like a maid pushing a vacuum cleaner along, right? Didn't happen. So all we have now is things that terrorise the dog and can't really get round awkward bits. And they certainly can't move the furniture. So we need to move towards the idea that there's going to be people who can't be gainfully employed, unless, of course, we just keep reducing the working week. It used to be 7 days, then it became 6 days. Now it's sort of 5 days. It's moving towards 4 days. Unless we keep doing that, we have to accept that some people won't be working in the normal sense. So we need universal basic income to be worked on, not just implemented, because we need a plan for it. There isn't a plan for it at the moment. But in general terms, this is why lifelong learning needs to be a thing. And there should be no issue with, say, is it Denmark, where you get paid to study at university, including a master's degree. You get paid for it, right? So what's the issue? Someone, like an area, say an area got fractured, right? A load of jobs go to, because of some revolution or something like that. You've now got a load of unemployed people. You look at the situation, there's no way that local economy is going to provide those jobs. So why don't you train them? Pay them a basic wage, like it's something to live on, a living wage, and say to them, go to college, do some training, do some level 3 qualifications if you don't have them, right? Then you can go to university. We'll pay you for that as well. Why don't we do that? You know, why does it have to be that if you don't go to university when you're 18, it's going to be harder later on? Why doesn't the state pay these people? Their local economy cannot give them a job, right? Right, we'll pay you for studying, because that way you're not getting money for nothing, you're getting money for studying, right? While you're a full-time student and you know, as long as you're turning up and you're meeting all the requirements, then you get paid. Why not something like that? But we have to move towards some system of universal basic income. It doesn't necessarily have to be paying people to sit on their arse all day. It can be paying people to study. You know, I mean, I've often thought actually sending people to university at 18 is a really bad idea, because 18-year-olds are stupid. I was really stupid. Oh my goodness. It would be much better. I know it wouldn't be better in terms of the longevity of the career, but it would sort of work out better if we let people do A-levels, then made them do some work for a few years and then go to university when they're like 23 or something, and they're grown up a bit. But anyway. You can put goggly eyes on the robot vacuum cleaner. Yeah, but the robot vacuum cleaner will not... If I was to vacuum around here, like I have to pick up this bin, I have to pick up the bag, I have to pick up some cables over there. The vacuum cleaner doesn't do that. The Jetsons promised we'd have a robot vacuum cleaner that would do that, because it had arms, you see. It wasn't just like the things we actually have. It had arms. It could pick things up, vacuum underneath it, and put it back down again with its super robot grip and strength. But anyway... we will have to leave it there. We've gone well over. We'll maybe pick some of these up again next week, if you remember. Who knows what the big story will be then. But thank you very much for coming on, everyone. Have a good evening. And until next time, I will see you later.